It started with one girl, then another, and another, until there were 10. 10 bright, young girls, all students at Crestfall High, no goodbye, no note to explain, no trace left behind, except for one line scribbled on the last page of a blood-streaked diary. He promised we'd be safe. The first girl to vanish was Mia Raines. 17. Bright. Then came Jenna Clark. Then Riley. Then Alyssa. 10 girls in total. Over a stretch of 9 months. All between the ages of 15 and 18. As pressure mounted, the town began to look for someone, anyone, to blame. Fear crept into classrooms, homes, and hallways. Parents no longer trusted the late buses. Students started texting their locations to friends every hour. And just when it felt like the trail had gone cold, another name surfaced. Gary Tulls. A janitor. 53. Worked the evening shift at Crestfall High for over 5 years. He kept to himself. Never spoke unless spoken to. Wore the same faded green cap every day. And more importantly, he had a past. 2 towns over, in 1993, he'd been charged with trespassing and resisting arrest. No one really knew the full story. The record was short on details and Gary never spoke about it. But once the papers got wind of it, the court of public opinion decided quickly. He became the town's most talked about suspect. But there was a problem. During the disappearance of the second girl, Jenna Clark, Gary wasn't even in town. His sister had taken him to a medical appointment 40 miles away. There were records. Witnesses. It didn't add up. Still, people watched him closer. Whispered in the grocery store aisles. The school district placed him on leave. But nothing concrete ever came from the suspicion. Then one of the juniors, a girl named Kaylee, came forward. She hadn't said anything earlier, thinking maybe it didn't matter. But the night before Riley went missing, Kaylee had stayed late to help set up the gym for a fundraiser. Around 6:45, she noticed someone standing just outside the back gym doors. A tall figure wearing what looked like a dark coat with the hood up. She thought maybe it was a parent or another student, so she didn't think much of it. But when she looked again a few seconds later, they were gone. What struck her as odd wasn't the person themselves, it was that they weren't moving. Just standing there. So, like they were waiting for something. Or watching someone. The school had outdoor cameras, but that particular corner had a blind spot. Maintenance records show that the camera overlooking the exit had been scheduled for replacement. But the request had been filed and canceled 3 separate times. And then there were the messages. Strange, unmarked notes slipped into lockers. Some students received short phrases written on index cards. Things like, "Don't stay late," or "She trusted the wrong person." The handwriting didn't match any of the girls. And while some believed it was a cruel prank, others weren't so sure. As detectives tried to follow up, a new report came in. A retired staff member claimed she'd once found Principal Crane in the lower hallways after hours. Said he looked startled when she appeared, almost like he hadn't expected anyone else to be in the building. When asked what he was doing, he just smiled and said he was double-checking locked doors. She said something in his voice made her uneasy. She never mentioned it before. Said she didn't want to get anyone in trouble. But now, she wished she had. Nothing was adding up. The janitor with a record was cleared. The security systems kept failing. People were starting to notice that Principal Crane always had an explanation. Always had a reason. And somehow always stayed above suspicion. But the real questions remained. Who was watching from the gym doors that night? Why did cameras keep going out? And what were those notes really trying to say? Whatever it was, one thing was clear. Someone knew more than they were saying. And with each passing week, the feeling in town changed. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the quiet sense that something bigger was coming. And no one knew who would be next. It was Miss Teller, the music teacher, who first noticed something that didn't sit right. She'd been at the school longer than Crane. Watched how the place changed after he arrived. At first, it was for the better. New programs, better results, more school spirit. But then there were things that didn't make sense. Meetings that happened after hours. Staff called in on weekends for quick updates, only they weren't told what the meetings were really about. And Crane always said the same thing, "It's for school business. Nothing to worry about." Miss Teller recalled a night in late October. She'd forgotten her scarf in the choir room and came back around 9:30 p.m. She used her staff key, walked in and heard voices. From the admin wing. She crept closer and saw Crane in his office, door slightly open. He wasn't alone. A student was there. A girl. She looked uncomfortable. Teller didn't hear the full conversation, just a sentence. "You know I wouldn't let anything happen to you." The next morning, Miss Teller asked the girl if everything was all right. The student smiled and said yes, but her eyes didn't. That same girl would vanish 2 weeks later. It was also Crane who insisted students could stay late if they had no safe way home. He told staff to leave keys with him if they couldn't supervise extracurriculars. He claimed to care about student safety. And maybe he did. But why was he always the last one there? When parents began to raise questions, he offered comfort. Held town hall meetings. Gave speeches about unity and hope. "We are one school, one town, one family," he often said. People clapped. Some cried. They believed him. He visited the families of the missing girls. Hugged their mothers. Sat in their kitchens and said he was doing all he could. One mother remembered him bringing soup and flowers, holding her hand while she cried. She later told police, "I remember thinking, either this man is the kindest person I've ever met, or he's hiding something." There were stories of girls being called to his office without explanation. Some said it was nothing. Just check-ins. Others never mentioned it again. One student, who eventually moved away, told her new guidance counselor she didn't feel safe around him. The counselor wrote it down, but it never made it back to Crestfall. Still, no one had any proof. Crane's record was clean. His reputation spotless. And every time suspicion rose, he had an answer ready. Calm, rehearsed, just enough to ease concerns. But slowly, more people started asking the same quiet question. How well did they really know the man running their school? And why was it that nearly every one of the 10 missing girls had at some point spent time alone with him? By late spring, the town could barely keep up with the losses. The fourth girl was Claire Jensen. A quiet, clever student who loved sketching people at the bus stop. Her bedroom walls were covered in charcoal drawings, most of them unfinished. Claire's mother said she was always careful, never stayed out late, and walked to school every day with her younger brother. On a Monday morning, she left the house like she always did. Smiled. Said, "See you after class." But she never came home. Claire's phone was found at the edge of the school's soccer field, screen cracked, battery removed. Her sketch pad was discovered in her locker a week later. The final drawing showed a man's face, eyes wide, mouth half open like he was about to speak. It wasn't labeled. But one classmate later said the man looked familiar. Like someone who worked in the building. Girl 5 was Elena Marks. She had dreams of becoming a journalist. Kept a small blue notebook in her bag where she wrote down everything. Rumors, overheard conversations, bits of her own poetry. She was sharp, confident, and had a habit of asking too many questions. One afternoon she told a friend, "I think something weird is going on here. And I'm going to figure it out." 2 days later, Elena missed the school bus. Security footage showed her walking back inside the school, alone. That was the last known image of her. Weeks after her disappearance, her mother received a padded envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was Elena's notebook. Pages were torn. But what remained raised even more questions. One entry, dated just 3 days before she vanished, read, "I met with him again. He says it's part of a mentoring program, but I never signed up for anything. He keeps telling me to keep it between us. I don't feel right." The police filed the notebook into evidence. But the school said they had no such mentoring program on record. No permission slips. No sign-ups. Nothing official. Nothing at all. Then came the sixth girl. Her name was Becca Lynn. Soft-spoken but always smiling. She loved animals, volunteered weekends at the shelter, and had just been accepted into a summer science camp. Her parents said she was counting down the days. They were supposed to go shopping that Saturday for a new backpack. But on Friday afternoon, Becca never returned home. What struck investigators most was a detail found in her diary. She wrote only a few lines in the days leading up to her disappearance. One stood out, "He says I'm different, special. But it feels wrong. I don't think I want to go back." Go back to where? No one knew. But what stood out was the pattern. All 3 girls had in some way referenced a meeting. One-on-one. Unscheduled. Unannounced. And in each case that meeting was with the same person. The principal. Still, there was no proof of foul play. No bodies. No eyewitnesses. And nothing yet that could link these girls beyond rumor and paper trails. The school called for calm. The police said they were looking into all possibilities. But the families began to notice that their daughters, so different in personality, hobbies, and routines, had one common thread. Each had been in contact with the one man everyone thought they could trust. In a town like Crestfall, where everyone knew everyone, questions began to echo in every grocery aisle, every church pew, every parent-teacher meeting. What did the girls know, and why were they the ones who vanished? As summer arrived, hope began to run thin. With 6 girls now gone, pressure on the police increased. Parents wanted answers. The town wanted someone to blame. And in the absence of truth, stories began to spread. An old legend resurfaced, something that had floated around for years but was never taken seriously. It was said that the school had been built on old farmland, and that the land itself had a strange history. Some claimed that in the 1800s, a family vanished from that very spot without a trace. Others spoke of strange fires that never left behind ashes. Whispers turned into campfire tales, and for a while they were just that, stories. But now those old tales were starting to sound different. It didn't help when officers found a series of marks behind the gymnasium, carved into the trees. Some thought they looked like symbols. Others said they were nothing more than initials from bored students. Then came the discovery in the basement of the old science building. Underneath a loose floorboard they found candles, scraps of cloth, and a small wooden box with dark red stains. A local newspaper ran the headline, "Is this a ritual site?" People began to talk about cults. They wondered if the disappearances were connected to some hidden group. Religious leaders held prayer walks. Mothers kept their children home. Fear settled over Crestfall like a quiet fog. But just when it seemed the town might be uncovering something, everything changed. A janitor came forward. He said the symbols carved into the trees were left over from a Halloween event 2 years prior, part of a school scavenger hunt for seniors. The candles and box in the basement? Stage props stored and forgotten. The red stains? Cheap fake blood from the drama club's haunted house set. The police confirmed the janitor's story. The fear of cults faded. But in the minds of many, the damage was done. If the town could be misled that easily, what else had they been wrong about? As officers backtracked, some parents started looking elsewhere. A few blamed the internet. Others suspected a trafficking ring. One theory pointed fingers at the new gym coach, who had only arrived months before the first disappearance. People dug through his past, only to find nothing unusual. No charges. No signs of trouble. Just an outsider in the wrong place at the wrong time. The red herrings piled up. Each one seemed like the missing piece until it wasn't. Meanwhile, the girls were still gone. And someone somewhere knew exactly why. It had been 4 weeks since the last girl went missing. People were beginning to believe, maybe hope, that it was finally over. Students returned to school, but the laughter wasn't the same. Eyes watched the halls. Doors that used to stay open were now shut tight. Trust, once given freely, was now held back. And then, it happened again. Her name was Lindsay Porter. Just 16. She had transferred from a school 2 towns over. Her family had moved into Crestfall hoping for a fresh start. Lindsay was quiet, polite, good with numbers. She'd joined the math club the week before. She was seen walking into the school's west wing after hours, holding a folder, likely heading toward the administrative office. That was the last time anyone saw her. Her mother reported her missing by morning. Search parties were organized. Flyers went up yet again. But this time there was something different, something the others didn't have. Lindsay had been recording. Tucked inside her coat pocket, hidden beneath a few crumpled receipts and a bus pass, was her phone. It had been left behind in a bush near the tennis court. A groundskeeper found it while checking for broken sprinklers. The screen was cracked. Battery nearly dead. But when they plugged it in at the station, they found an audio file, just under 2 minutes long. The recording starts with footsteps. Quick. Nervous. Then a door creaks open. Lindsay can be heard breathing heavily as if she's running or hiding. Then silence, followed by a voice. "Mel, come. Friendly. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. Just sit. I'll be right back." A chair scrapes across the floor. There's a pause and then, a muffled cry. It's faint but clear enough, Lindsay trying to speak through something covering her mouth. The recording ends abruptly, like the phone had been yanked or dropped. The audio was sent for analysis. When the results came back, the detectives sat in silence for a long time. Voice recognition flagged a high match with someone already familiar to the investigation. Someone who had appeared in photos, given interviews, and spoken at candlelight vigils. The software pointed to the principal. Now, voice match software isn't enough for an arrest. It's a starting point. But in a case where nothing had stuck, no fingerprints, no witnesses, no footage, this was the first real crack. And people noticed. Parents gathered outside the school demanding answers. Reporters camped near the parking lot. The police, up until now quiet and cautious, started asking more direct questions. The principal's voice had been a comfort to students for years. But now, that same voice was under a microscope. One detective, off record, said, "He told us he was the last to see 3 of the girls because they came to him for help. We believed him. But now, maybe they did. Maybe they trusted the wrong person." For the first time, the story wasn't slipping through their fingers. They had something they could hear. And it changed everything. After the voice recording surfaced, the town didn't sleep. The streets, once calm, felt colder. At night, porch lights stayed on. People kept their children close. Doors were locked even in daylight. In Crestfall, where everyone once knew everyone, suspicion had taken root. Inside the school, tension rose. Some teachers stood firmly by the principal, calling the accusations outrageous. They spoke of his years of dedication, how he remembered birthdays, wrote handwritten notes to students who lost a parent, even helped pay school fees for struggling families. They couldn't believe the man they'd worked with side by side was being questioned in connection with such a dark case. But others weren't so sure. There were whispers in the staff room. A few teachers began looking back on moments that didn't sit right, times he'd been in his office late, closed-door meetings with certain students, excuses made too easily. One science teacher recalled a day when a student left his office crying, and when asked what happened, she'd simply said, "He said I need to learn how to keep secrets." The teacher never reported it. Said she didn't want to stir up drama. Now, she couldn't stop thinking about it. In the middle of all this, an envelope appeared. No name. No return address. It was slid under the front doors of the local police station just before dawn. Inside, a single sheet of lined notebook paper. Written in thick black ink were just 5 words. "The ground knows the truth." There was no explanation. No date. No signature. No prints. The paper had been folded once, carefully. Officers examined the message over and over. What did it mean? Was it a warning? A clue? A joke? They weren't sure. But it stuck with them. The ground knows the truth. Over the next few days, that phrase would be repeated quietly among detectives and townspeople alike. As the investigation pressed forward, fear turned into anger. Parents demanded more transparency. Students, already walking the halls with lowered eyes, were pulled from class by worried mothers and fathers. School attendance dropped. Trust was broken. The town council called a closed-door meeting. The police increased patrols. Reporters from out of state began showing up with cameras and questions. Crestfall was no longer just a quiet town, it was a headline. But for those who still lived there, this wasn't a story. This was their reality. 10 girls were still missing. And now an 11th. Every face on the bulletin board at the community center had a name, a family, a story. And still, no answers. Some residents began looking to the past, wondering if something had always been wrong beneath the surface. Others focused on the present, growing more uneasy with every new day the case remained unsolved. The note had done something no press conference or patrol could. It reopened the idea that the answers weren't just hidden, they were being watched over. Buried maybe. But never gone. And so, with every footstep across school grounds, with every creak of the floorboards, with every gust of wind across the playing field, one question began to echo louder than the rest. What exactly did the ground know? It was a Thursday morning when everything changed. Cold, still, quiet. The kind of morning where even the birds seemed unsure whether to sing. The school's greenhouse had long been locked up, untouched since the gardening program was shut down 5 years earlier. Some students said it was haunted. Others just thought it was boring. No one really went near it. Except for Joe Benton, the groundskeeper. He'd worked at Crestfall High for nearly 20 years. Quiet man. Came in early, left late. Spoke more to the plants than to people. But that morning Joe noticed something strange. A patch of soil behind the greenhouse, close to the edge of the fence, had been dug up, and then covered again. It wasn't fresh, not exactly. But it didn't match the rest of the ground. The weeds hadn't grown back the same way. Something about it felt wrong. He called the school's assistant principal, who then called the police. They arrived by noon, brought in a forensic team. The first few hours passed with little movement. A few shallow digs. Quiet whispers among the officers. Then around 3:15 p.m. the tone shifted. A body had been found. It was badly decomposed. Forensics couldn't immediately say who it was. But the small bracelet wrapped around one wrist, a thin silver chain with a red glass heart, matched the one last seen on Marissa Clark, the second girl who had vanished. Then came another patch. And another. In the next 48 hours the site was sealed off. Police worked through the night under heavy lights and tarps. One by one they began uncovering the personal belongings of other girls, part of a backpack, a cracked phone case, a denim jacket, even a pair of shoes still tied. Not all were remains, but enough to rattle the town to its core. By the weekend, the story had left Crestfall and reached national headlines. Media vans crowded the main road. People from out of town showed up to leave flowers, prayers, and questions. There was no longer any doubt. The missing girls weren't runaways. They hadn't skipped town. They were never meant to be found. And then, just as pressure reached its peak, the arrest came. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, police arrived at the principal's house. No warning. No press. Just a quiet knock at the door and a pair of handcuffs. He didn't fight it. Didn't ask why. Just nodded, put on his coat, and walked out with them. Neighbors watched from their windows as he got into the car. At the station, he answered questions calmly. He said he didn't know how those girls ended up buried behind the greenhouse. Said he was just as horrified as everyone else. But when asked why the girls' belongings were found near a building he alone had access to, he said he had no idea. When asked about the voice recording, the audio that sounded just like him, he said, "People hear what they want to hear." Some believed him. Others said he looked too calm, too put together. Like he'd known this moment was coming for a long time. The arrest didn't end the panic. It raised more questions. Had they truly found the one responsible? Or had they just found someone easy to blame? If he wasn't the one, then who was? In the days that followed, parents didn't feel safer. If anything, they felt more afraid. Because the truth wasn't fully out yet. And the ground? It was still giving up secrets. When news broke that the girls' remains had been found and the principal had been arrested, the town stood still. But what came next unraveled the trust people had built over decades. At first, nobody wanted to believe it. Not Mr. Hallberg. Not the man who greeted every student by name, who stayed late after school to help struggling kids, who gave speeches about hope and second chances. He had awards, plaques, letters of praise. Parents called him a role model. Teachers called him a friend. But people don't always know who they're dealing with. And sometimes, the version of someone we see is just one part of the story. Reporters started digging. Background checks. Old school records. And slowly, a different picture began to form. It turned out Crestfall High wasn't his first school. It was his third. His first teaching job was at a private academy in Vermont. He worked there for 2 years, then suddenly left. No farewell party. No public explanation. Just gone. The school declined interviews. But one former staff member, who asked to remain anonymous, said a student disappeared during his time there. A teenage girl. Quiet. Bright. Nobody ever found out what happened to her. There was no arrest. No proof. Just rumors. And a transfer. Then came the second school. This time in New Mexico. He wasn't just a teacher there. He ran a program for what they called troubled teens. Kids with anxiety, anger issues, those falling behind. It was meant to help students stay on track. But some now say it was something else. A way to isolate the vulnerable. A way to earn their trust. One girl, now in her 20s, came forward after the arrest in Crestfall. We'll call her Emily. Her face was never shown. Her voice disguised. She said she had been part of that program. Said she had weekly one-on-one meetings with the principal in a small office behind the library. Said he'd make her feel special. Like she was the only one he cared about. But one night something felt off. He asked her to stay after dark. Said he needed to check in before the weekend. She said no. He pressed. She said no again. She never told anyone. Not until now. In her words, "Back then I just thought it was weird. I didn't think it was dangerous. I didn't want to ruin his life if I was wrong. But when I saw the girls on the news, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Her story matched what others hinted at. A pattern. A method. He built trust first. He knew who needed attention. Who craved approval. Then he crossed lines that weren't easy to prove. People started to wonder how no one had seen it before. How someone with so much access to children could move from school to school without raising alarms. But there were gaps in the record. Paper trails that ended too early. Recommendations that didn't match the facts. At Crestfall, no one had questioned his past. He arrived with glowing reviews. Clean files. Warm smiles. But behind those documents were missing pages. And behind the smiles, more questions than answers. The town was starting to realize, this wasn't just about the girls. It was about the system that allowed a man with shadows behind him to keep walking into places filled with trust, and children. XXXX. The arrest of the principal shook the town, but what followed was even harder to process. In the days after the discovery beneath the greenhouse, the school board held an emergency meeting at the town hall. Rows of chairs were filled, but the silence inside was louder than anything. Parents sat shoulder to shoulder with neighbors they'd known for years, some who agreed with them and some who didn't. At the front, under the bright white lights, school board members looked stiff and unreadable. They shuffled papers, adjusted microphones, cleared their throats. And then, a woman stood up. Her name was Lisa Hartwell. Her daughter, Brianna, had been missing for 6 months. Lisa walked slowly to the microphone. She didn't read from a speech. She held something in her hands. It was a small, stained notebook with pink flowers on the cover. She opened it. Some pages were torn. Some were smeared. And one had what looked like dried blood in the corner. She read aloud. He told me I could talk to him about anything. That if I was sad or scared or needed help, I could come to him and it would stay between us. He said I was special. That no one else understood me the way he did. But something doesn't feel right. I don't like how he locks the door. I want to tell someone, but he said it would ruin everything. You could hear a pin drop. Some people stared straight ahead, their jaws tight. Others cried quietly. One man stood and stormed out. A board member wiped their eyes. Lisa didn't stay after reading. She walked back down the aisle, clutching the journal, and left without saying another word. That night, local news stations showed clips from the meeting. By morning it was national. Comment sections flooded. Talk shows debated. Was this justice finally catching up? Or was it all too fast, too emotional, too raw? People in town began taking sides. Some believed Lisa, believed the evidence, believed the pain in her voice. Others weren't so sure. They asked why it had taken so long to come forward. Why no one said anything sooner. Why a man with a spotless record, on paper, was now the face of something so disturbing. Outside the school gates, protest signs appeared. One read, "Protect our kids." Another said, "Innocent until proven guilty." Students walked out. Some teachers refused to return until the investigation was done. Parents pulled their children from class. Others sent them anyway, saying this was all just fear talking. Friendships ended. Families stopped speaking. The town, once known for its quiet streets and close-knit neighbors, started to feel like a place where no one knew who to trust anymore. And under it all, one question lingered. If this could happen here with someone they all admired, who else had been ignored? And what else was waiting to come to light? As the weeks passed, the principal's arrest did little to bring the community peace. In fact, it seemed to stir up more questions than answers. Just when it seemed like things might be settling down, an anonymous tip changed everything. A message appeared in the town's online forum. No name. No traceable sender. Just a cryptic claim that seemed impossible to ignore. It read, "The principal wasn't alone. There are others. Watch the footage." The tip led investigators to check CCTV footage from the night the last girl went missing. It wasn't much, just blurry images of a dark hallway, but there was something, or someone, there. A faculty member, someone no one had suspected before, was seen walking near the crime scene. It wasn't just an idle passing. The footage showed them lingering, pausing, watching. The faculty member had never been part of the original investigation, but now their presence raised serious doubts. Who was this person? And why hadn't anyone noticed them before? Then came the breakthrough that no one was prepared for. A voice memo surfaced. It was sent from a phone that had been left behind during one of the disappearances. The file was short but chilling. The first voice was unmistakable, the principal's. But then, another voice, deeper, unmistakably male, joined in. The conversation was short and parts of it were muffled, but one thing was clear. The two men were discussing the girls, planning their next move. One of them said, "It's almost time. We can't let them get too close." The second voice, disturbingly calm, responded, "No, we can't. But they're running out of time." The connection was undeniable. The principal wasn't working alone. But who was the other voice? And who else was involved? The more investigators dug, the more things didn't add up. How had this gone unnoticed for so long? What kind of web had been weaved and who else had been caught in it? The deeper the search went, the more unsettling it became. This wasn't just about a missing girl or a disturbed school official. It was something far larger. Something more far-reaching. The question was no longer about what had happened. It was about what was still happening. And who else was pulling the strings behind the scenes? The investigation seemed to reach a dead end, with so many questions still unanswered. But then, something unexpected came to light. something that had been overlooked for far too long. It came from the ninth girl, the one who had never been officially linked to the principal's web. The one who had been written off as just another face in the crowd. Her name was Sarah, and her disappearance had puzzled investigators from the start. During a routine search of her classroom, an investigator stumbled upon something small, something hidden, scrawled on the underside of her desk. It was faint, scratched into the wood, almost as if she'd done it in desperation. The words were simple, but they struck like a lightning bolt. Not just him. The words didn't make sense at first. Who was she talking about? Not just him. Was she referring to the principal? Or was there something else? Something deeper? What happened next changed everything. As the team dug into the mystery, the search expanded into the school's archives. Hidden among dusty files and old paperwork, something chilling was found. Files that had been tucked away in a forgotten corner of the archive. Files detailing more than just the principal's actions. These files were records of multiple incidents, disappearances that had never been made public, names of students that had been erased from school records. Each case connected to a trusted figure within the school system. It wasn't just one predator. It wasn't just the principal. What Sarah had uncovered, what she had tried to expose, was much larger than anyone had anticipated. The files revealed a pattern, one that spanned over years. Teachers, coaches, even local community leaders. All linked by a trail of silence, secrecy, and the careful destruction of evidence. What Sarah had scratched into the desk had been a warning, a signal to those who would come after her. She had known something the rest of the world didn't, or perhaps had been too afraid to see. It was clear now, the disappearances weren't random. They weren't isolated events. They were part of something far more deliberate. And the truth was hidden in plain sight, carefully buried in the very records that were supposed to protect the students. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, the question grew more urgent. How many more people were involved? How far did this go? And how much longer could the truth stay buried? As the investigation progressed, there was still one crucial piece of the puzzle missing, the 10th girl. The one who almost escaped. The one who had been smart enough to slip through their grasp, but not fast enough. Her name was Emily, and she had been different from the others. Cautious, observant, always aware of her surroundings. Unlike the others, Emily had begun to sense that something wasn't right long before her disappearance. She kept her distance, always watching, always listening, trying to stay one step ahead. She had even told her friends she was planning to leave the school for good. She had everything figured out, until the moment she vanished. But Emily wasn't just another victim. She was smart. She fought back even if just for a moment. She had known something was coming. When investigators revisited the principal's office after his arrest, they found something unsettling. A small bracelet, one that matched the description of the jewelry Emily had worn. It had been left behind, tucked away on a desk as if it had been dropped in a hurry. It didn't take long to confirm that the bracelet belonged to Emily. But it wasn't just the bracelet that raised questions. It was her phone's GPS data, which led authorities to a shocking discovery. Emily's phone had been active the day before the police arrived. Its GPS data showed that she had been under the school's greenhouse. The very same place where the remains of the other missing girls had been found. The timing was crucial. Emily had been there just one day before the police began their search. Had she been there to see something? Or was she trying to escape? Had she been the last to uncover the truth? But what happened after that? Why didn't she make it out? Why had Emily gone quiet, just when it seemed like she was so close to exposing everything? The truth about Emily's fate remains just out of reach. Was she silenced by the people who had worked so hard to keep their actions hidden? Or had she uncovered something far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated? As the investigation turned over every stone, Emily's story began to feel like the final chapter in a much larger and more terrifying tale. The truth about what had happened at that school was starting to unravel, but it came with a heavy price, one that many were not yet ready to face. After months of searching, questioning, and uncovering bits and pieces of truth, the investigation had finally reached its breaking point. The principal, the man at the heart of it all, was now face to face with the evidence he could no longer deny. The walls were closing in. His time to hide the truth was running out. The authorities had gathered enough evidence, Emily's bracelet, the GPS data, the disturbing findings under the greenhouse, to confront him. They had him cornered. They knew he had been involved, they just needed him to admit it. And when the questioning began, the principal's calm facade began to crack. For hours, investigators pushed, demanding answers, challenging his every word. He had been silent for so long, but now the truth seemed to claw at him. And finally, in a moment of weakness, he gave in. Sort of. The confession wasn't as clean-cut as everyone had hoped. There were no tearful admissions of guilt. There was no remorse. Instead, what came out was a half-hearted acknowledgement of his role. He admitted to taking part in the disappearances, but only partially. He claimed he had been under the control of people far more powerful than he was. "I was protecting them," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't have a choice. I thought I could control the situation." He refused to name names, but the message was clear. He wasn't the only one involved. He had been part of something much bigger, something beyond the school, beyond his position as principal. Then the mention of a faculty cult came up. It was a suggestion that sent chills down everyone's spine. Had there been more? Had there been a network, a hidden group operating within the very walls of the school? The idea of faculty members being involved in something so far-reaching was terrifying. But the principal dismissed it, claiming it was nothing more than a rumor, a distraction from the truth. The investigators weren't convinced, but there was nothing they could do. There wasn't enough evidence to pursue the idea further. The principal's confession was full of holes, and he knew it. But at least he had cracked open the door just a little. Just enough to let them know there was more to this story, more that had yet to be revealed. As the interrogation continued, it became clear, this wasn't over. The principal's confession was just the tip of the iceberg, a glimpse into something much deeper, something that stretched far beyond the confines of the school. But would they ever be able to fully uncover the extent of it? Or would it all remain buried just out of reach? And as for the principal, he may have been caught, but he still held on to his secret, his protection. The question now was, who else was out there watching, waiting, protecting the truth that he had tried so desperately to bury? After months of investigations, unanswered questions, and relentless digging, justice finally seemed to catch up with the man who had caused so much pain and devastation. The principal, once beloved, admired, and trusted by so many, was sentenced to life in prison. His actions had left a community shattered and a school in ruins. The courtroom was packed, the weight of the case heavy on everyone present. The sentence was a formality, his fate had already been sealed, but the question still lingered, how had it all gone so wrong? The truth was, no one truly knew how long the abuse had been going on. No one knew how far the darkness reached, how many had been hurt before the first disappearance, or how many had been kept silent. What everyone did know was that the principal had been the one to orchestrate it all, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And now, as he was led away in handcuffs, there was no sense of closure. There was only the question of what else had been hidden, what other secrets had been locked away. In the aftermath, the school, once a hub of education and hope, was shut down permanently. The halls, once filled with laughter and the chatter of students, now stood empty, echoing only the memories of what had been. The classrooms were abandoned, their walls telling stories of years of dedication to learning, now tainted by the dark history that had unfolded behind them. No one wanted to walk those halls again. The school had become a symbol of broken trust and lost innocence. But even as the doors of the school closed for the final time, the community struggled to heal. The pain was too great. The loss of those young lives was too much to bear. The families of the girls who had vanished were left to pick up the pieces of their broken hearts. Some tried to find peace, but for many that peace was fleeting. How could they ever truly move on from the pain? In honor of the victims, a memorial was built in the town center. The girls who had been taken, the lives that had been lost, were finally remembered the way they should have been from the start. The memorial stood as a testament to their lives, their hopes, and their futures that would never come to pass. It was a place for families to gather, to mourn, and to remember what had been lost. And though the names of the girls were carved into the stone, their stories, their dreams, were left behind, forever etched in the hearts of those who had known them. Yet, even with the memorial, the questions remained. How had this been allowed to happen? How had the principal, someone so trusted, been able to hide his darkness for so long? There were no easy answers. No one could truly explain how so many had been manipulated, how so many had been deceived. The community was left to deal with the aftermath, the devastation, the grief, and the uncertainty of a future that could never erase the scars of the past. The families, the survivors, and the investigators who had uncovered the truth were left with one final question. Was this really the end? Or were there more shadows lurking in the corners, waiting to emerge when least expected? After months of investigations, unanswered questions, and relentless digging, justice finally seemed to catch up with the man who had caused so much pain and devastation. The principal, once beloved, admired, and trusted by so many, was sentenced to life in prison. His actions had left a community shattered and a school in ruins. The courtroom was packed, the weight of the case heavy on everyone present. The sentence was a formality, his fate had already been sealed, but the question still lingered: how had it all gone so wrong? The truth was, no one truly knew how long the abuse had been going on. No one knew how far the darkness reached, how many had been hurt before the first disappearance, or how many had been kept silent. What everyone did know was that the principal had been the one to orchestrate it all, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And now, as he was led away in handcuffs, there was no sense of closure. There was only the question of what else had been hidden, what other secrets had been locked away. In the aftermath, the school, once a hub of education and hope, was shut down permanently. The halls, once filled with laughter and the chatter of students, now stood empty, echoing only the memories of what had been. The classrooms were abandoned, their walls telling stories of years of dedication to learning, now tainted by the dark history that had unfolded behind them. No one wanted to walk those halls again. The school had become a symbol of broken trust and lost innocence. But even as the doors of the school closed for the final time, the community struggled to heal. The pain was too great. The loss of those young lives was too much to bear. The families of the girls who had vanished were left to pick up the pieces of their broken hearts. Some tried to find peace, but for many that peace was fleeting. How could they ever truly move on from the pain? In honor of the victims, a memorial was built in the town center. The girls who had been taken, the lives that had been lost, were finally remembered the way they should have been from the start. The memorial stood as a testament to their lives, their hopes, and their futures that would never come to pass. It was a place for families to gather, to mourn, and to remember what had been lost. And though the names of the girls were carved into the stone, their stories, their dreams, were left behind, forever etched in the hearts of those who had known them. Yet, even with the memorial, the questions remained. How had this been allowed to happen? How had the principal, someone so trusted, been able to hide his darkness for so long? There were no easy answers. No one could truly explain how so many had been manipulated, how so many had been deceived. The community was left to deal with the aftermath, the devastation, the grief, and the uncertainty of a future that could never erase the scars of the past. The families, the survivors, and the investigators who had uncovered the truth were left with one final question. Was this really the end? Or were there more shadows lurking in the corners, waiting to emerge when least expected? Drop a comment below and let us know what are your thoughts about the story. Hit the like button, subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more unbelievable real-life mystery stories.